There is something profoundly liberating about the decision to be quiet, not in a passive or fearful way, but in a deliberate, intentional silence that reflects clarity rather than confusion. It is the silence of one who knows that their work is sacred, that their path is unfolding, not for applause, but for truth. The most meaningful transformations happen not when you announce them, but when you live them, and there is a peculiar strength in understanding that you do not owe the world an explanation for your evolution. You owe yourself the experience of becoming your highest self without compromise, without distraction, without performance, in a world intoxicated with noise, with constant declarations, with the compulsion to share every step and every thought. There lies a forgotten wisdom in moving in silence. Not because you are hiding, but because you are choosing to protect what is still in seed form. You do not dig up a seed every day to prove that it is growing. You water it, you guard it, and you trust the process. And so it is with your inner work, your discipline, your ideas, your personal growth, your vision for your life. These things require space to breathe and time to mature. They are not meant for public consumption before they are ready. In fact, premature exposure often destroys potential, because once something is seen, it is judged. Once it is judged, it is defended. And once you defend it, you lose the sacred solitude that allowed it to emerge in the first place. This is why you never tell people what you are doing, not because you fear their criticism, but because their attention, no matter how well-meaning, can alter the natural rhythm of your growth. What you are building within yourself is not a show. It is not content. It is not a performance to be clapped at or questioned. It is the construction of an internal empire, one that will one day speak so loudly in presence, in energy, in excellence, that words will be unnecessary, and by then the results will speak in such clarity that no validation will be required. What is most powerful is not the man who explains himself, but the one who has no need to, the one whose presence alone is his message, whose work speaks louder than his posts, whose consistency outshines any promise, and whose silence reveals more about his character than any speech could ever convey. This is not about isolation. It is about intentionality. It is about understanding the economy of energy and the value of sacred focus. When you speak prematurely, you scatter your energy. When you overexpose your intentions, you dilute their potency. And when you seek to be understood too soon, you invite confusion instead of clarity. So the wisest thing you can do in a world obsessed with exposure is to learn the discipline of quietude, to refine your vision in solitude, to work when no one is watching, to strengthen the muscle of anonymity until your results arrive dressed not in noise, but in undeniable evidence that you have become what you once only imagined. And so the question becomes not who is watching you, but who are you becoming when no one is? And that is the beginning of true power. The truth is that the more you speak of your path, the less real it becomes for you, because the mind that seeks expression too early often seeks it out of insecurity, not readiness. When you speak of what you are building before it is built, you create the illusion of progress. And sometimes that illusion is enough to satisfy the ego, so you stop before you start, or you compromise before you complete. When in fact the real process is sacred, slow, and silent. It is like the unfolding of a flower that it does not announce its petals. It simply blooms. It does not seek permission. It does not need confirmation. It knows in the stillness of its being that blooming is enough. And this is what life invites you to do when you stop telling everyone what you are going to do, and instead begin becoming the kind of person who simply does it. The external world rewards visibility, but the soul is nourished by invisibility. It finds power in the space where no eyes are watching, where you can fail and try and rise. Again, without commentary, without measurement, without fear of misinterpretation, this space is not emptiness, it is fullness. It is where depth is born, and depth does not shout. It echoes through your actions, through your being, through the quiet certainty of your steps. There is a kind of maturity that only develops when you learn to withhold your declarations and let your work unfold in its own rhythm. This is not about being sneaky or deceptive. It is about protecting what is fragile and honoring what is unfolding. And when you live this way, you will feel the peace that comes from not needing to explain, the joy of creating without comparison, the beauty of holding something sacred in a world that trades it for clicks and applause. Silence becomes your ally, not your prison. It becomes the space where your soul recalibrates, where you rediscover yourself, where your strength is built layer by layer, away from the performance, away from the noise in time. Your work will be undeniable, not because it was loud, but because it was true, because you honored the process instead of selling it, because you stayed with it through doubt, through darkness, through distraction, and you let it grow without asking the world to water it for you. And when it blooms, people will wonder where it came from, and you will smile, not because you hid it, but because you trusted it. And that is a power few understand in a world of constant display. So let your life speak in silence, and let your silence carry more weight than 1,000 empty words. To live in silence is not to retreat from the world, but to meet it on your own terms, without explanation, without spectacle, without the desire to be admired. When you learn to keep your intentions to yourself, you also learn to value them more deeply, because now they are no longer about impression, but about expression. They are no longer about what they look like to others, but about what they feel like within you. And there is something immensely freeing about that, because in that quiet space, you begin to move differently. You begin to act not for reward, but from resonance, not from pressure, but from purpose. And the moment you stop trying to prove yourself, you begin to discover yourself. You begin to understand that life was never asking you to be loud. It was asking you to be real. And being real has very little to do with being seen. Being real is about being rooted. It is about standing firm in what you know to be true, even when no one else sees it or validates it. It is about planting yourself in the soil of inner conviction and letting your work grow from there, not as a display, but as a devotion. Because the truth is, most people do not really want your truth. They want your performance. They want your highlight reel, not your hidden hours. And when you understand this, you stop performing and you start building. And the act of building in silence becomes your meditation, your mastery, your rebellion against a world that only respects what it can measure and package and praise. But you are not here to be measured or packaged or praised. You are here to become whole. And wholeness is a quiet thing. It is not loud. It is not branded. It does not need affirmation. It simply is. And when you reach that place, you will know, because you will feel no urgency to broadcast your journey, only to live it fully. There is a sacred kind of confidence that arises when your life is no longer up for public debate, when your energy is no longer scattered by the opinions of others, when your actions are no longer diluted by premature applause. This is the silence of the sage, the stillness of the centered, the calm of the one who does not need to announce their arrival because they never left themselves in the first place. And in that state, every step you take is true, every word you speak is precise, every moment you live is yours, because it was not stolen by the need to be seen. It was given wholly to the act of being, and that is the real win, not the trophies, not the titles, not the recognition, but the quiet knowing that you lived honestly, fully, and without compromise. There is a kind of freedom that cannot be bought, only earned through the discipline of not needing to explain yourself. And the irony is that the more you speak of your future, the less it belongs to you, because the moment you externalize in your vision, you invite misunderstanding, and once misunderstood, your energy begins to shift from creation to defense. And in defense, nothing grows truly, because now your attention is divided and your spirit is on guard. And that is the slow death of clarity. The one who creates in silence is not hiding. They are protecting, not out of fear, but out of reverence. The way a sculptor keeps their unfinished piece away from the crowd, not because it is flawed, but because it is still becoming, because interruption is not always obvious. Sometimes it comes in the form of praise that leads to pride, or advice that leads to confusion or distraction, disguised as validation. So you learn to protect your quiet space the same way you protect a fire from wind, not because the fire is weak, but because it is sacred. And in that protection, you begin to see what others cannot. You begin to feel the rhythm of your own becoming unedited, undisturbed, untouched, and what a rare and precious thing that is, to belong to your process, to move through life, not as a performance, but as a presence, to no longer be at the mercy of other people's reactions or permissions or applause. When you stop telling people what you do, you begin to listen to what you actually are, and what you are is Not a brand or a mission statement or a projection. You are a living, breathing unfolding, and that unfolding needs time, not timeline space, not spotlight. The deepest rivers run silently, and so do the strongest people, not because they are avoiding, but because they are absorbing, they are grounded, they are growing, they are choosing to live from a depth that does not need to be marketed or approved. And in that silence, something incredible happens. Your energy returns to you. Your creativity rises, your inner compass strengthens. And suddenly your life is no longer about being impressive, it is about being aligned, and alignment needs no defense. Because it is not a claim, it is a clarity, it is a way of moving that needs no witness. And if you find it, you will begin to feel that everything loud around you is only noise. But everything silent within you is truth. And in that moment, you will know that the true path does not require promotion, it requires devotion. There is a subtle power in walking your path without the need to illuminate it for others, because in that darkness you begin to see the world differently, not as a stage, but as a sanctuary, not as a place to be noticed, but as a place to be nurtured. And you begin to feel the difference between movement and noise. Movement is quiet, it is deliberate. It does not beg for attention. It simply is like the turning of the earth or the rising of the tide. It does not announce itself, and yet it transforms everything. And when you begin to live this way, you notice how much of the world is addicted to volume, how much of your former self needed to be seen, not to be understood, but to feel real. But now you realize that reality is not confirmed by visibility. It is deepened by presence. When you focus in silence, something remarkable takes shape. Your efforts no longer scatter. They concentrate your thoughts, no longer race. They clarify your intentions, no longer waver. They root. And suddenly your work becomes a meditation, not a measurement of worth. Your progress becomes internal, not performative. Your discipline becomes a quiet vow, not a declaration. And in this stillness, you encounter the version of yourself that does not need convincing, the one who knows without needing to explain. And in that knowing, you begin to see that everything you were trying to prove was only a distraction from what you were meant to live, because the moment you stop trying to be something for others, you start becoming something for yourself. And that shift is not loud, it is not dramatic, it is subtle, like the changing of seasons or the opening of a flower. And that subtlety is strength, because it is not manufactured, it is not sold, it is not borrowed, it is earned. And that which is earned in silence carries a weight that cannot be denied, not because it seeks validation, but because it no longer requires it. And that is where the real victory lies, not in the moment you are finally seen, but in the countless, unseen moments that built you in the dark, when no one clapped, when no one asked, when no one cared except you. And that is enough. That must be enough, because until it is, you will always chase what cannot fulfill you. But once it is, you will begin to live from a place that cannot be shaken. And from that place, your work, your words, your way of being will echo louder than anything you could have said about yourself, because you did not tell them, you showed them. There is a subtle power in walking your path without the need to illuminate it for others, because in that darkness you begin to see the world differently, not as a stage, but as a sanctuary, not as a place to be noticed, but as a place to be nurtured. And you begin to feel the difference between movement and noise. Movement is quiet, it is deliberate, it does not beg for attention, it simply is like the turning of the earth or the rising of the tide. It does not announce itself, and yet it transforms everything. And when you begin to live this way, you notice how much of the world is addicted to volume, how much of your former self needed to be seen, not to be understood, but to feel real. But now you realize that reality is not confirmed by visibility. It is deepened by presence. When you focus in silence, something remarkable takes shape. Your efforts no longer scatter. They concentrate your thoughts, no longer race. They clarify your intentions, no longer waver. They root. And suddenly, your work becomes a meditation, not a measurement of worth. Your progress becomes internal, not performative. Your discipline becomes a quiet vow, not a declaration. And in this stillness, you encounter the version of yourself that does not need convincing, the one who knows, without needing to explain. And in that knowing, you begin to see that everything you were trying to prove was only a distraction from what you were meant to live. Because the moment you stop trying to be something for others, start becoming something for yourself. And that shift is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is subtle, like the changing of seasons or the opening of a flower. And that subtlety is strength, because it is not manufactured, it is not sold, it is not borrowed, it is earned. And that which is earned in silence carries a weight that cannot be denied, not because it seeks validation, but because it no longer requires it. And that is where the real victory lies, not in the moment you are finally seen, but in the countless unseen moments that built you in the dark, when no one clapped, when no one asked, when no one cared except you. And that is enough. That must be enough. Because until it is, you will always chase what cannot fulfill you. But once it is, you will begin to live from a place that cannot be shaken. And from that place, your work, your words, your way of being will echo louder than anything you could have said about yourself, because you did not tell them, you showed them. There is a quiet revolution that happens when you choose to focus inward, when the world pulls your attention in 1,000 directions, and yet you decide to look only in one, your own, and in that decision, you reclaim the power of simplicity. Not the kind that lacks depth, but the kind that carries precision. You no longer need to speak of your vision, because your life becomes your statement, and your actions become your message, and your consistency becomes your language. And the people who once needed to hear your plans will now only need to observe your results, not because you are proving anything, but because you are embodying everything. This is the beauty of living silently with purpose. The world begins to wonder not what you are saying, but what you are becoming, and you begin to wonder less about what they think and more about who you are. And that shift is the beginning of wisdom, the beginning of detachment, not from life, but from illusion. The illusion that being seen is the same as being valuable, that being heard is the same as being understood, that being praised is the same as being fulfilled, when in truth, the most fulfilled people are often the least concerned with how they are perceived, because they have replaced the need for validation with the joy of alignment. And that joy is renewable because it is sourced from within, not borrowed from outside. And when you move this way, you begin to master the art of invisible momentum. You are not standing still. You are preparing. You are not lost. You are listening. You are not behind. You are building, and every quiet step is a sacred offering to your future self. A promise that you will not abandon your growth for the sake of attention. A vow that your vision deserves more than decoration. It deserves completion. And in time, this way of living rewires you. It strengthens your patience. It sharpens your focus. It deepens your peace. And you begin to see that silence is not something you endure. It is something, if you choose, because it is the space where your truth can breathe without distortion. It is the canvas where your character is painted, not with colors, but with decisions. And the more you live in this space, the more you begin to attract those who move the same way, quietly, intentionally, with a fire that burns inward instead of upward. And those are the people who will recognize you, not because you told them, but because you reminded them of themselves. The elegance of silence is that it invites only those who are ready to listen. And the deeper you go into that quiet, the clearer it becomes that most of what we share is noise, not communication, and most of what we reveal is not insight, but insecurity. We speak to be seen, we explain to be accepted, we announce to be acknowledged, but none of that leads to peace. It only leads to exhaustion. And so you begin to withdraw, not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom, because you realize that energy is sacred and attention is currency, and both must be spent with care. So you invest them where they grow, not where they are drained. You give them to your practices, to your disciplines, to your quiet rituals that no one sees, but that shape everything. And in those unseen hours, you learn something profound. You learn that transformation is not dramatic. It is not loud. It is not made for display. It is a soft burning. It is a private unfolding. It is a letting go of what you thought you needed, and a welcoming of what you truly are. And when you live this way, when you guard your process, when you speak, only when the words are ripe, something changes. People stop asking what you are doing and start noticing who you are becoming, because your life begins to speak for you. And what it says is honest, not curated. What it says is stable, not performative. And in a world that chases applause, your steadiness becomes a mirror, reminding others of the strength they too can find in stillness. And this is how you begin to lead, not by commanding, but by exemplifying, not by instructing, but by embodying, not by volume, but by vibration. And that vibration resonates beyond the reach of language. It touches those who are also building in silence. It reaches those who are also walking without maps. It inspires those who are learning that it is not the loudest who are the strongest, but the most aligned, the most anchored, the most present. So you keep walking, not in a rush, but in rhythm, not for attention, but for truth. And in time, your quiet steps will echo louder than any speech, because they were not made to impress. They were made to express the fullness of your becoming. The power of doing without declaring, of becoming without announcing, is that your growth begins to take on the quality of inevitability, not because you forced it, but because you nourished it, not because you shouted about it, but because you stayed loyal to it, even when no one asked, even when no one noticed, even when the silence felt heavy and endless, because that is where your roots were forming, that is where your foundation was deepening. And those who try to grow without roots, without grounding, without solitude, often find their success hollow because it came too fast, too loud, too soon. But you are building the kind of strength that cannot be undone, the kind of clarity that cannot be borrowed, the kind of identity that cannot be shaken, because you did not skip the stillness, you did not reject the quiet, you leaned into it. And in that leaning, you found yourself, not the self that seeks performance, but the one that stands in presence. And that presence becomes your path, your teacher, your compass. And it guides you not toward attention, but toward alignment. And in alignment, there is no rush, there is no urgency, because you know that what is real does not need to be hurried. What is yours does not need to be chased. It needs to be nurtured. So you keep tending to your inner life the way a gardener tends to soil, not expecting a bloom each day, but trusting the cycle. And while others chase exposure, you chase depth. While others perfect their presentation, you perfect in your practice. While others ask how they look, you ask how you feel. And in that shift, you step outside the game. You no longer need to play by their rules, because you've found your rhythm, and your rhythm is slow and sacred and sovereign. And when the time comes, and it always does, your work will rise not as a surprise, but as a reflection of what you've already become. And those who see it may call it sudden, may call it luck, may call it talent, but you will know it was none of those things. It was silence. It was patience. It was intention. It was you choosing every day to keep your fire lit without ever needing someone else to see the flame. To reach the end of a path walked in silence is to realize there was never truly an end, only a beginning deeper than before, a threshold into another level of being, one that no longer seeks to be validated or verified by the eyes of others, because what has been built within you is no longer fragile, it is no longer in need of applause or defense, it simply exists. And it exists with such quiet certainty that even when you are doubted, even when you are unseen, you remain rooted and calm and unshaken, because the journey was never about being recognized, it was about becoming whole. The discipline of not telling people what you do has shaped your integrity. It has refined your motives, stripped away the ego, and left behind only what is true. And in that truth, you are no longer tempted to convince anyone of your worth or explain your direction, because your life is the expression, and that expression cannot be misunderstood by those who carry the same frequency, those who have also walked silently, who have also built quietly, who have also sacrificed in the dark without demand. And now they see you, and they do not ask how they nod in knowing, because real always recognizes real, and in a world that craves spectacle, you have chosen depth. And that choice has created a resonance around you, a gravity that draws in not the crowd, but the few who matter, not the masses, but the meaningful. And they do not need your words, they feel your presence. And your presence is your legacy, the quiet strength that speaks louder than noise, the unshakable peace that shines brighter than performance, the authentic rhythm that outlasts every trend. You now understand that silence was never the absence of sound, it was the presence of focus. And you kept it, you honored it, and it rewarded you not with applause, but with becoming the very person you were seeking to be, not through declaration, but through devotion. And now you walk, not to arrive, but to remain in alignment, not to impress, but to express, not to chase, but to live. And that is the power of never telling people what you do. That is the wisdom of focusing in silence and winning in public. Not because you aimed for the spotlight, but because you became light itself. True transformation does not require validation, and real growth does not demand attention. It is in the silence that character is forged, and in solitude that clarity is found. To never tell people what you do is not secrecy, it is sacredness. It is choosing depth over display, alignment over applause, and becoming over boasting. When you walk your path quietly, you begin to understand that progress is not measured by how many people notice, but by how deeply you are rooted in your purpose. You trade visibility for stability, and in doing so, you cultivate a power that is unshakable. Your work becomes your voice, your actions become your message, and your discipline becomes your quiet legacy. This way of being requires patience, trust, and intention. But what it gives back is something far greater than praise. It gives peace, presence, and authenticity. And the question is, can you commit to the path of silence, to the process of becoming without the need to be seen? Can you honor your vision enough to protect it in the dark and let it grow until it blooms on its own? If so, tell me in the comments what silent goal you are nurturing right now. Thank you for being here. Your presence matters. And if this message spoke to you, please like this for video and subscribe to the channel to support the next chapter of this journey together.